So Brian's back with us to continue sharing his experiences with his struggles with pornography and what he's learned by participating in addiction recovery programs, as well as what he's learned in implementing more acceptance and commitment therapy principles that are found in Life After Pornography. So I'm really excited to bring this conversation with you. Every time I chat with Brian, I learn a lot more and develop even more compassion and understanding for what this struggle has been like and how liberating it can be to finally get access to those principles that are so needed to finally let go of your struggle with pornography. If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio. Well, we're back again, and Brian is joining us for our second chat about some of his experiences and struggles with pornography. And we just had our first conversation about this last week, your first experience doing a podcast. And I'm just really curious, the counselor in me just can't help it. Like, how was that to share your story in such a open way like this?
Certainly a little unnerving. Just kind of putting yourself out there. But I think that's the beauty of it. And we were just talking a little bit before of how the principles in ACT are liberating. And I think part of the principles in ACT will tell you that talking about this is completely okay.
Yeah.
And as you continue to do that, and certainly I'm not sure if everyone needs to be on this scale right here of putting it out there, but as you talk to more people, it becomes more accepting to you and to others, and it's been really cool. And so I'm always grateful for an opportunity to talk about it and get some professional advice.
That's awesome. And I think you're right. Like, not everybody needs to go on a podcast and share their experiences or blog about it or share it on
Right.
social media. But part of me is like, but wouldn't it be awesome if we all did? And it wouldn't matter what our struggle was, if it was pornography or depression or thoughts of suicide or substance use problems, whatever that thing we're struggling with, if we could be like, I can talk about it because it's so human. And I think our mental health struggles would dramatically decline if we all had a forum like this to be, hey, this is what I've gone through. Hey, now it's your turn. What have you gone through?
Absolutely. I was just thinking this past week, there's like a main drag here. And I was just thinking, what if someone just stood on that street corner with a sign and was like, hey, I struggle with this. And just like how liberating that would be. And certainly it's not necessary. That's probably not a good analogy, but like if everyone was open enough to do that, would the mental health towards the problems we face be completely different? Would we lose all the stigma around certain things? No shame.
Yep.
It'd just be interesting. Yeah.
I think so. And there's that party game where you put a card on your head and it's
yeah.
like a certain thing or person. But like if that was really the thing we're struggling with and we walked around that and we didn't have to hide it and we weren't the only one with a card on our forehead, everybody had one. And you see people, it's like, oh, you got the same card as me.
Right.
And I know you, and now we can chat about this. That would be incredible.
It would lead to more connection than it would to negative repercussions, which is cool. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Yep. I think so. And so I like to fantasize about things that would be awesome if we could
Right.
accomplish that. And maybe that's kind of what we're doing, is giving permission for people to put a card on their head to say, this is what I struggle with. You know,
Yeah.
it's okay to struggle, and hey, we got some similar struggles. And sometimes the card on our head changes. It's not porn anymore. It's anxiety or stress with raising a family, whatever the struggle
Right.
is. Those cards, they change.
Oh yeah. Big time.
Yeah. Well, you have such a unique experience, Brian, because you mentioned last time going through some addiction recovery type approaches and then coming across and experiencing more principles from acceptance and commitment therapy. I kind of want to hear how those worlds have been for you. Like, tell me about what your experiences have been like going through addiction approaches for pornography concerns.
Yeah. I certainly been a roller coaster, to say the least, of finding different paths to go down, seeing what helps and what doesn't help, what struggles are different with different approaches. It's been very interesting. So I found ARP or the addiction recovery program, um, after hitting kind of a rock bottom. I think I shared some of that in the last episode. And after um, a few weeks of wrestling with it in my head of, oh gosh, like, am I really at the point where I need this?
Mm.
Like, is that really who I am? And I think that's a huge struggle, is just saying like, oh, like I remember watching like videos in like high school about addicts, right? And like the things that happen. And you think, holy cow, like, is that really me? Do I need one of these programs?
Mm.
And I could go into a lengthy description of the mindset I had, but ultimately I chose to go. And even opening the door to my car and opening the door to the church building that the meeting was held in, all of those were just hard decisions to
Mm.
actually get in the room. But I remember being so grateful for that decision, because starting off with the pros of the addiction recovery program perspective, I think group really, really benefited me in becoming more accepting and open about the things I was struggling with. Because all of a sudden you walk in, and to go back to like the cards on your head analogy, you walk into a room and right off the bat, no one even has to say anything, but they've all got the card.
Yep.
And you feel a sense of like, I know you better than like, or you know me better than some of my best friends do, because you know this huge part of my life. And going through the program, obviously the steps are um, very hopeful, not easy. I mean, step 4, where you have to make a fearless and written moral inventory of yourself, where you're being very introspective and going through memories and certain events in your life that have led to certain things or behaviors or mindsets. It was very enlightening, and I think it gave me an increased foundation of, okay, here's what I'm struggling with. It's okay to talk about it. It's
Mm.
okay to dig deep within yourself and look at this and really try and understand it. And so I loved the sharing portions of those meetings, and hearing what worked for some people, what worked for other people. There was a lot going on, and it was mostly just an energy of talking about it
Yeah.
that was so powerful to me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring up that human element, because often we think of pornography concerns as such a sexual concern, and yet struggling with something like porn is so isolating, and you tend to withdraw and you don't have that connection. There's so much shame. And I think just being in a group of people that understand and are willing to listen and are not judgmental, provides that connection, that validation, that forum to be able to talk about these things. That group element seems to be so therapeutic and so helpful in so many ways, counteracting the problems that come with a pornography concern.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to have that burden lifted almost. One of my favorite things about ARP was older gentlemen coming in, and just the initial, it's funny because I went in there and I didn't know what to expect, but you get to the sharing portion and it's very much like the movies, where it's like, hi, I'm Brian. And it's like, hi, Brian. And,
Wow.
it follows the structure. But then you say, yeah, like I'm recovering from an addiction to pornography, masturbation, lust. And you go through and you say that, and it's cool to watch people literally as they say it, they kind of sit up straighter and they're like, all of you in this room are the first people to hear this in
Wow.
40 years, 50 years. And to see taking a more holistic view, the literal like physical impact that can have on you is amazing. And I did love that about the connection, the human acceptance that you feel in there. And so, yeah, that was certainly a huge benefit to me, and it led to great conversations with friends and family that allowed me to talk about this more openly. And as such, it actually led me to Life After Pornography and the acceptance and commitment therapy approach, which certainly proposes some different elements.
Yeah. Yeah, when you talked about those people standing up and sharing this for the first time, that gave me chills. To think about how incredible that is and how addiction programs have given people that opportunity that they haven't had before in their life to actually share their story. And to keep that a secret for decades, for me, it's heartbreaking. And then to hear you say, here's people that have held on to this, finally have an opportunity to share, is incredible.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm probably going to quote you back to yourself a few times during these episodes, but in one of your interviews, there was a quote about, in terms of sexuality, it seems like you can only bring it up or talk about it when you mess up.
Yeah.
And I think the change there needs to happen fast, and it needs to happen at a big level, because you just think about carrying that weight around with you for 40 years. And I could hardly do it for 10. And to go your whole life, it's terrible that there's that much shame around it.
And you're right. Usually the time that people start to have conversations around sexuality or sexual behavior is when they've been labeled an addict. It's like, whoa. I mean, that's why someone who's been struggling is they haven't even had the opportunity to talk about it.
Right.
And you said not even being able to manage it for 10 years. When you say 10 years, I think that's a decade of your life. That's a big chunk of time. That's a weight to carry.
Right. And that's been a bittersweet relationship for me, because I look at the lessons I've learned in those 10 years, and I'm certainly grateful for everything that I've learned. But it's just interesting to think, hold on, maybe if the resources were more available when I was in high school and at a mature enough stage to appreciate and understand those, how much different would my life have been, decisions I would have made mindfully. Just not having regret, but maybe thinking, okay, I've seen how my life has changed already in the past few years and even months with these approaches, and we just got to get them out there.
I'm pretty confident saying I never would have met you if you would have had these ideas and concepts much earlier in your life. But one thing you mentioned reminded me, because I live in the Intermountain West, so I work with a lot of Latter-day Saints around pornography. And I'd say the vast majority of them have gone through the addiction recovery program and then experience ACT, these principles. And I've seen that progression. And I
Right.
don't think going through an addiction program is a necessary first step, but I've seen a lot of people do that and it opens some doors and they recognize like, yeah, part of this was really helpful and part of it didn't take me to the next step. So I wonder what else is out there, but I've seen that progression quite a bit.
Can I ask, in your experience and in your conversations, what have people told you about that transition?
Oh, yeah, it's been variable. I think I've had some people come in and say, I'm currently in an addiction recovery program for this, and I'm going every week. I'm diligent, following the steps, but honestly, my behavior's not changing, and I still feel terrible about myself. So I need counseling to help me get through my addiction program. And that's often when I pause and it's like, wait, you're kind of in a treatment type approach, and now you need therapy to help you with your therapy. What does that tell you about this situation? But I think it's that mindset where this is just natural human nature, where if we have a problem, we're going to use every tool in the tool shed to combat it. And so I think about that idea of like if we're trying to build a birdhouse, we could go to Home Depot and buy circular saws and jackhammers and drill presses and all these things and destroy our birdhouse. And like those tools aren't bad, but the fact that we're using all of them is not going to be helpful. And so I've had this chat with people where they say, hey, I'm in an addiction approach. I also want to try another approach. And I say politely, no, you got to pick one. And I don't care
Yeah.
which one you pick, but I want you to commit to it. And I'll say, because the ACT approach that I'm going to offer is a really different way to approach this struggle. So if what you're learning in your 12 steps program is helpful, I'm not going to distract you with something else. Keep doing what you're doing if it's working. If it's not working, let's try these other concepts and ideas. But we can't use two different types of tools for this issue.
Right. That's so interesting. I just had one of those like light bulb moments of something clicking with a memory I've had.
Mm.
And I remember being in the addiction recovery meeting and hearing people say, yeah, I was talking with my therapist and sitting there and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I need a therapist. Like, it seems like everyone has one. And clearly that's a step that I'm either missed or is something else. But I also remember thinking like, wait, why? Like, I understand the principle behind that, but like we're here and we're talking, like, why isn't this enough?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because in when you initially brought up that language, the dialogue that you had with people transitioning from ARP to ACT, I've felt that same way. I I really enjoy those meetings. I look forward to those. I feel great, but the behavior hasn't changed for me.
Yeah.
And as such, it's when you're going to a program and you think you're working on that birdhouse, but it's not working, and you're like, okay, maybe I just need to drill harder, right? And then all of a sudden you're drilling into the grass, right? You're not even on the birdhouse. Um, that's how you feel, and it's like you feel worse,
Yeah.
and it can be a little dangerous. So I appreciate you saying and understanding that. I'm sure you've had a lot of people say that.
And I think that's why it's demoralizing, where it's like, hey, I'm here every week and I'm working and I'm doing everything you said, and my birdhouse doesn't even have walls yet. Like,
Right.
what's up? And so I think what we tell ourselves is, well, of course, this is the program. These are the steps. These all make sense. If it's not working, then I'm not doing it correctly.
Yeah.
And we blame ourselves. That's what our mind does. Like, well, this all makes sense on paper, so it's you. Our mind never says, like, wait a minute, you're doing everything they said and working really hard. It's not working. Maybe these tools aren't the right ones for this birdhouse.
Right.
Our mind never asks that. And like you said, you ask yourself that question, like, why? Our mind rarely does that. It just does what it thinks is the next step. And you have that moment where it's like, wait a minute, why are we in this? If the birdhouse isn't getting built and people are still in counseling, why? And it's that reflection on what we're doing that's going to be really key in actually leading to changes in behavior.
Yeah. And gosh, I've got so many questions now. Because I really appreciate, and I've actually asked you this specifically, is why is the program Life After Pornography, right? And your response of, very simply put, well, I believe there is a life after pornography, after the struggle.
Yeah.
And you can get over that. And I remember being in ARP, and obviously for 95% of the meetings I went to, I was the youngest one there.
Wow.
And I probably lowered the median age by a lot. Granted, I didn't. There are meetings with a younger demographic, but I just remember looking and being like, "Is this something I'm going to need to attend every week for the rest of my life? Like, am I going to be on vacation in the Maldives and tuning into my ARP meeting back home?" And not that I had a weird mindset about that of, okay, like, yeah, maybe it is something maybe that's just who I am, right? As an addict. And that's something I need to do. But I love the approach that, like, no, you're not an addict. This is something you can get over. And life can get so much freer.
Yeah.
You can be free from that.
Yeah.
That was a powerful perspective change.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that resonates with me because I think about, we all struggle with something, and then sometimes we struggle with the struggle and keep it going.
Right.
And I think, yeah. And so we just have a hard time differentiating how much of our struggle is the struggle versus how much of this is our method for addressing the struggle. And that's really difficult. And I think that's maybe one of the limitations I've experienced with addiction approaches. I love the group mindset and the opportunities to share, but this idea that this will be a forever battle for you, for me, is that self-perpetuating problem where it's like, it doesn't have to be, but if we believe that it is, well, now it really is. And what I've seen with ACT and the data we have out of some of the work researchers have done at Utah State is, after 12 sessions of ACT, I mean, that's 12 weeks, that's 3 months, over 90% reduction in porn viewing. I mean, that's dramatic. It's not like this is going to be a forever thing, be vigilant forever. Because I think that vigilance is one thing that keeps this problem going. And so I very much not only believe there's life after pornography struggle, but I've seen it. I've seen that with people. I've experienced that, where through these principles, they're able to change their relationship to this struggle and move forward in their life. And there's still urges to view that come up, and sometimes they still choose to view, but the battle with it and the ongoing struggle and constructing your whole life around being an addict and trying to control this, that struggle is over. And there is liberation, and there is more room for creating relationships and pursuing your values and interests. And I have seen that over and over. And that is honestly what fuels me to be like, this doesn't have to be something that's stamped on your gravestone, that here lies Brian, the addict. It's like, no, that doesn't have to be what you want it to stand for. That could be part of something you struggle with in your life, and we can overcome that struggle and move forward.
I cannot think of a more hopeful message to hear. And going back to earlier when I said, I wish I could have heard that. I wish I could have heard everything you just said 8 years ago. But I'm certainly glad that I'm hearing it now and can experience that.
Yeah.
Because that, honestly, just coming from it's just so much relief, like put the sword down, like
Yep.
you're done fighting, go home.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, I don't think I can honestly articulate that. And anyone who's struggled with this probably has a hard time with that too, but
Yeah.
just the amazing hope that gives.
And I could see that in you. And I think that is so key, because if you view pornography concerns as emotional concern, if you're feeling hopeless and heavy and perpetually waging a war, you're going to need to cope with those emotions somehow. And the coping strategy is looking at pornography. But if you believe that, hey, this is just an unhelpful coping strategy and there is hope, and I don't have to keep waging this war, the need to keep looking at sexual images to cope with those emotions is going to go down dramatically. That's a big part of it.
Absolutely. And those are big emotions. Those are
Huge.
huge,
Yeah.
massive. Um, and I think real quick, I do want to ask about, speaking of that, I think there's a language that accompanies a lot of the pornography sphere, the sexual concern sphere, the addict sphere. And I think all that can contribute to those emotions of, okay, I'm an addict, all of a sudden, where's my hope?
Mm.
Hopelessness, you stay in the loop of pornography to cope with that. And that's one thing I really appreciate about acceptance and commitment therapy, is that it berids itself of that language.
Yep.
And that in itself is a powerful switch of, you're no longer defined by something other than what you want to be defined by.
Yep. It's
Hope,
huge.
right?
It is. And I think about that's a major shift from maybe traditional addiction approaches that are saying your problem with pornography is a biological or neurological addiction. And what ACT is saying is your problem with addiction is language. That's it. It's not saying it's a biological or neurological addiction. From an ACT perspective, there might be biological or neurological changes going on that are making it more difficult, but that's less relevant than the actual language that we use to describe it. And so terms like addiction or relapse or addict, that actual language is what keeps us stuck. And that language is infused within that treatment kind of paradigm. And so when I'm chatting with somebody and getting to know them, I can guess that they've been to an addiction group because of the language they use. They talk about accountability buddies and sponsors and relapse and how many days. And I'm just like, whoa, yep, that language is infused. And that is partly why somebody is stuck with that. If I view sexual images, I had a relapse, and now that's evidence that I'm an addict and I have to start over.
Right.
So it's like it never allows you to make any progress in life, because any behavior you do is evidence that you're an addict again and that you still need more help and you're stuck. And I think about, there's a lot of people that make quite a bit of progress and learn things about themselves and then have a relapse, and it's just like wiped out. And I think about this big chalkboard that says days without incident, like at
Yeah, right.
a big like manufacturing place, and it's like, oh
Yeah.
no, wipe it out. It's now 0 days since last incident. And like all that hope and progress is just gone because of a word called relapse. A word, 2 syllables, a group of letters and sounds that we produce from our throat, has the power to completely wipe out what we've learned across weeks and months and years. It's all gone. One word.
I it's the most, it's weirdly like powerful, right? The language of it. And when you said like the struggle is with the language, and that's where the change happens. It's almost like laughable, the simplicity of that. and like a little bit frustrating. Like, have you ever been like so exhausted that you just start laughing? You're just like, oh my gosh, like this whole time, right? But and it's certainly not easy. I don't ever mean to make it seem that shift is effortless. But it is simple, and it's it's just funny how powerful the language behind that is,
Yeah.
and what that can do to your psyche, if
Yep.
that's the right term. And I do remember that. The fact that you'd be going good, you'd go a month or two, and I always think about it in terms of like a race, and you've just run 2 months, and left this demon at the start line, but all of a sudden you relapse and he's right there next to you,
Yep.
and he didn't have to work at all. He just popped up right next to you, and I'm like, well, that's not fair. That doesn't make any sense. Um, but it discounted all that progress you'd made. And so, yeah, the language, I think, has been a huge change, and to avoid not only the language but the connotations that come with relapse and addict, and how freeing it can be.
Yeah. I like how you talk about that, because it is like that demon's right back with us, but it didn't move. Like we ran back and said, "Oh, there you are again." And
That's it. Yeah.
it's incredible that we do that. And I think about if we view pornography concerns as an emotional concern, where there's often emotions that trip us up, like we're stressed or overwhelmed or lonely or sad or grieving. And often that urge to view porn is in response to those emotions, which are quite normal and are going to show
Hmm.
up as part of living. But there's that belief that, oh, if I had an urge to view or I viewed, it's because I'm an addict, instead of, oh, wait, I'm a human experiencing emotions. And these are challenging. I don't go backwards. It's, what can I learn about where I am in this life, where these emotions are coming from? How am I doing? And how can I kind of pick myself up and keep going? Because I think as you keep going in life, there's going to be new emotions that show up that we need to understand and cope with. And there's times that we cope better, times that we don't cope as well. But I think that language, that relapse, makes us start over. And so when I'm working with somebody, I'll say, hey, let's pick a different word. And
Yeah.
I want to describe what we're doing instead of labeling it as something. Because like you said, relapse has connotations. And so what I invite people to do is actually, let's describe what actually happened. And that takes a little bit to get to the language, but often people get to, well, I chose to view sexual images. It's like, yes, you chose to view. So you had an urge, probably because there were other distressing emotions there, and you chose to look at naked people having sex. Okay. And sometimes describing what you actually did feels different. It feels uncomfortable, or like, oh, I can't believe I chose to do that. But that is actually what we did. That's a better description than putting on an evaluation or a judgment like relapse that takes us back.
Yeah. And I think the analogy you came up with that manufacturing plant of the chalkboard, right? And what a classic, maybe that's just like a human condition of like days without a problem, right?
Yep.
How long can we go? But I think how different would it be if you put, instead of on that whiteboard, it was, why did we have this incident? You know,
Yes.
like why did this fall over? And it's okay, we didn't support it, right? We didn't do the necessary procedure. Someone messed up, made a mistake. Let's learn from that.
Yep.
But when you just put days without problem, there's no learning opportunity. It's just a number,
Yep.
and it'll haunt you.
Yep.
So that's, yeah, it's not only a powerful language shift, but also the experience that you have with the language of let's learn. I love that about the LAP, or the LAP approach, in the acceptance and commitment therapy, is you're it's uncomfortable, but you're actually learning from the mistakes,
Yeah.
and in turn that'll help you far more in the long run.
I think so. And I think when we use words like relapse, it feels like a failure. And I think about
100%.
that word, I even have a different acronym for fail. And for me, that fail stands for first attempt in learning. That's all it is. But we're so
I love
scared
that.
of failure where it's like, I'm not going to try, or, oh, I failed. It's over. I got to start over. And it's like, no, that's just our first attempt in learning. I mean, that is part of learning. And I like your thought of like, hey, let's learn from that. Let's put that on the chalkboard. And the other thought I had just in this moment is, wouldn't it be cool on that chalkboard if we had days since we last checked in with ourselves? Like days since we
Ooh.
asked how we're doing. And that
Yeah.
is going to help us not have more incidents, if we want to use that kind of analogy. If we're checking in with ourselves and it's like, yeah, I'm lonely, I'm struggling. It's like, oh, okay, it sounds like we need more connection. There's probably not going to be an incident. Or it's like, yeah, I'm so stressed and overwhelmed. It's like, okay, what can we let go? Things that maybe we don't need to do. And what can we do that's maybe fulfilling and relaxing, maybe soothing? It probably ain't going to be many days with incident if we were checking in with ourselves more consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that principle. And I've actually been thinking a lot about that recently, just in a self-reflective kind of way of like, I'm really mean to myself, you know? And the things that I've said to myself, there is no way on earth that I would say them to anyone else.
Yeah.
And that dichotomy of how on earth can I be so outwardly, I feel like that's genuine, but to myself it's harsh and cruel. But going to your example of the first thing you do when you see someone is you ask them how they're doing.
Yeah.
But the first thing you do when you see yourself is find something wrong, right? And
Yep.
it's like, ooh, if we can switch that, that's powerful.
It's huge.
And asking, being mindful, asking yourself, hey, how are we doing? You know,
Yeah.
what does today look like? Like, oh man, I lonely, right? Like I can feel that coming on. What can we do to change that? How
Yep.
can we, let's feel that and accept it and then figure something out. That's huge. And that's a big thing in that transition, from the addiction perspective to a mindfulness perspective of, okay, let's dive in and see how we're doing and adjust. I think that's huge. And
Yep.
to have the power to adjust.
Oh, I like that,
Yeah.
that it's even an option that you can adjust.
Right. Yeah. Huge.
And I think if we don't check in with ourselves and say, how are we doing? What do we need? Our mind's going to do it anyway. And I think about like the reason why our mind recommends you go look at pornography is it's aware that you're stressed or overwhelmed and lonely. And it's saying you need to chill out. You need to relax. Here's some endorphins. Maybe if you masturbated, you'd feel better. Because
Right.
I'm aware that you're stressed and lonely and sad. I'm going to recommend you feel better.
Uh-huh.
So if we're not checking in with ourselves and meeting those emotional needs, your mind's going to continue to recommend you view pornography in an effort to soothe.
Is that, I'm honestly just curious. Is that just the way we're wired?
Yep.
That's just how our minds work.
That's it. So our mind is not interested in helping you find purpose, helping you with self-actualization. Our
Mm-hmm.
mind is just designed to help you avoid pain. And that's how we survive. Where if there's
Right.
physical threats to us out there, it's like, that's dangerous. You might die. Let's get away from poisonous things and dangerous animals and cliffs. Those things might end your life. And it does the same thing with emotional pain. It doesn't distinguish physical threats to your safety to emotions. It's like, oh, you're feeling really sad and overwhelmed? that might be dangerous to your survival. Let's avoid it. Let's get away from it as fast as we can. And you've discovered that viewing pornography and masturbating helps you feel better and get away from that emotional cliff. Oh, good. I found a solution to keep you alive. I'm going to keep recommending
Right.
you do that in the moment. And our minds can't see in the future. We like to think they're good fortune tellers, but they can't predict the lottery winning numbers. They can't look around the corner. And our mind's like, as long as I keep you feeling good in this moment, I did my job. And I think that's part of the struggle is our mind is always going to try to help you avoid discomfort. And say, if you're anxious, don't do things that make you anxious. If you're feeling depressed, don't talk to people. Like if you're feeling overwhelmed, just look at pornography, feel better. And our mind doesn't care about that all of those decisions to avoid discomfort are making your life worse. It's not programmed to understand that. It's just that when it's worse, it's going to recommend those same things to help rescue you in that moment. And it's going to keep getting worse. And your mind's going to keep recommending the same things. And it's really doing its job. That is its job, is to help you feel better in this moment. And it's through mindfulness that we can kind of take a step back and observe that and be like, oh, thanks, mind. I appreciate you keeping me safe from cliffs and helping me recognize when I'm overwhelmed. But I've learned from my experience that some of these things you recommend to me actually make it worse. I'm not going to choose to view pornography again because I'm feeling lonely, because I actually feel more lonely. And you're going to recommend I do that again because that emotion shows up. And so mindfulness just allows us to observe that and make some choices about our future. But our mind, that problem solver, is only about this moment. It's not concerned about what's going to be meaningful for you or fulfilling or worthwhile. It's trying to help you avoid pain. That's it.
I mean, that's mind blowing, right? I mean, that's one of those things you hear it and you're like, oh, like I think I knew that. But then someone articulates it and it's like, that makes so much sense. Because that's one area where I thought maybe the term addict applied is because there was and again with the language like dependency, right? And I throw major rabbit ears on that one.
Yeah.
But the fact that, oh, like if I wasn't an addict, like why would this keep coming up as something I feel like drawn to?
Yep.
But when you say it like that, it's literally a mental device. It's a like
it's programmed.
mechanism.
It's what our minds do. And
right.
it's
And
what
that just
all of our, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It just makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's what all of our minds do, not just what addict minds do. It's our minds have evolved to solve problems, and that's just what they do.
Right.
And I think that's the beauty of what I like about ACT is we have this mind, and it's actually really, really good at problem solving things in the outside world, and maybe not so good at like emotions and urges and stuff. But we've had this battle with our mind, and it's like, you are the problem. Like, why can't you do this better? But really, all we need to do is understand the rules. We need to understand the function of our mind, the role that it plays in our life, and when to listen to it and when not to. So I think about my mind as a best friend that's always there for me, always going to point out problems, and sometimes gives really crappy advice. And it's like, I'm still going to keep that best friend in my life. Because when there are major problems, it's going to be there for me. If it's like if I'm bleeding or like I haven't eaten, it's going to be like, you need to eat and maybe bandage that. It's like, I need that best friend. Other times it's saying, hey, you're not feeling good. Maybe you should eat a bunch of junk food or scroll through social media. Maybe you should go drink, look at sexual images. And it's like, thanks, best friend. You recognize I'm suffering, but all those things you just recommended ain't going to fix it. I might feel a little better in the moment, but I'll feel worse. But thank you for recognizing that I'm hurting right now.
Absolutely. I think it's so cool that with more understanding comes more freedom in that regard. And that, you're right, that is something exceptionally essential to act. Is we're not trying to put the brain, just disregard it completely. We're trying to use it for what it's good for,
Yeah.
and not disregard its function or its role as a best friend who will always be there. It's not like you can just get rid of your mind, right? Like,
Yep.
there's irony in that, but understanding that and being able to use that to its fullest,
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And with mindfulness, that all comes into play, and the power of tapping into that and looking at the process and saying, okay, you did great at telling me that, yeah, I'm lonely, but that advice, oof, I've been down that road. We're not going to do that. Try something else.
Yep.
That like sits very well with me. That makes sense. And I I think anyone who would potentially be listening to this and who has struggled for some time would also have that same feeling of, you've been told so many different things, so many different approaches. You've read the books. I remember hearing the statistic that I went to a pornography like keynote or some sit-in seminar, and the leading psychologist just said, I have yet to have one client who's come in and not tried everything in their power to get rid of this.
Yep.
And you look at that and you're like, well, then why can't we find it, right? But here it is. And to think of how good that's going to feel hearing this to everyone, because I know how good it's felt, because I've heard it all and I've had that resonate.
Yeah.
And say, oh, this is it. That makes so much sense. We've tried every other approach, and it doesn't help to run from it. It doesn't help to ignore it. It doesn't help to fight it.
Nope.
Let's understand it.
Yep. That's it. And I
And
hope that people listening to you that have gone through the struggle give us feedback. I hope they reach out and say, hey, that did resonate with me, or I struggle with that, or I disagree with that. I'd love some feedback about that, because this is pretty incredible. And maybe the one thing that still amazes me is there's still debate in the professional community on whether or not pornography is actually an addiction or not. And that debate can rage on, and people can say it is, it isn't. Regardless of it's an addiction or not, ACT is still effective. If it's a biological addiction or it isn't, this treatment is still effective in changing your behavior. So if you're still convinced, we're like, oh, I think it really is, it's like, okay, it can be. I don't need to argue that. This therapy approach is still effective. No matter what we call it, addiction, compulsion, impulsivity, high sexual drive, we have good outcome data that ACT is still effective. And that to me is incredible.
it works, right?
Yep.
What else is there? So,
And that's all I'm shooting for. And so I've actually got kind of tired with the is it an addiction or not debate. It's like, you know what? I'm a lot more interested in helping people change their behavior and finding what works. And people smarter than me can continue to debate on whether it's an addiction or not. And while that debate rages on for the next couple decades, I'm going to work towards helping people find what works and helping them move forward in their life. And that debate, I don't know when or if it will be resolved. And in the meantime, I'm going to help people find what works.
right. And I can guarantee you, almost guarantee you, that everyone who's struggled with this, they probably don't care.
It doesn't matter.
They do not care one bit. It's, let's change this. I've been fighting this for so long. Whatever it is, let's change the behavior.
Let's do it. And that's how I feel. And so I don't think ACT is the approach for everybody. I don't think there's a one size fits all. And if there was another approach that was developed that had even better outcomes than ACT, I would use that. Like, that's my only goal. Like, I didn't create
Right.
ACT. I'm not wed to ACT. ACT doesn't pay me any money. I'm just trying to find an approach
Right.
that works. And if there's a better one, I'm going to use it. And right now, the
Yeah.
best one that I've seen is ACT. But it doesn't mean it's the best. And it doesn't mean it's the only one. There could be other ones that are comparable or even better. We just don't have the research on it yet. And so I always keep that open mind that there may be even better ones that are even more effective. And I'm always on the lookout for that. But right now, it's ACT.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think the principles in ACT will help you regardless.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of what you just said, but not even with just the struggles of pornography or compulsivity or addiction or any of that. It's just, when will it ever be a negative to be more mindful? Like, why not use our mind to the fullest? Like, I wish this was a class in school. That's all I got to say. That would be fantastic.
And maybe that's a great place to wrap up is, again, this struggle, it's an opportunity to learn more about how our minds work and how to develop other coping strategies and live a better life free of these struggles. And yeah, it's annoying that pornography had to teach you this, but it is an opportunity. And it's like, yeah, 10 years, like, this is totally lame and frustrating. And it's an opportunity right now to learn a better way to live the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, life after pornography, it's taught me not to be defined by the things I struggle with, and that I can define myself.
Yep.
And that's the best gift you can ever give anyone.
I love that. That
And
really
that's the message
me.
we're trying to get out.
That's it. Well, Brian, these chats are so fun. I look forward to next week where we continue this chat. Like, there's so many places to go, and I'm captivated hearing your experiences, your insights, but also, like, as we're talking, I'm seeing like additional connections, and I'm making connections because it's unique to have this dialogue. I don't think I've ever had a chat quite like this, so I'm gaining a lot from it as well. So I appreciate you joining me.
And thank you so much. This is the highlight of the week. So
Awesome.
it's huge. But thank you.
Well, we'll do it again next week.
All right.
Okay. See you, Brian. Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to LifeAfterPornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.